Story 1. The Endless Mile Marker 237. Marcus Webb had been driving the I-80 corridor for 23 years, hauling everything from electronics to produce across Wyoming's desolate stretches. He knew every rest stop, every gas station, and every quirk of that highway like he knew his own reflection. The night of October 14th, 2019, started like any other. Diesel fumes, country music on the radio, and the hypnotic rhythm of white lines disappearing under his Kenworth's hood. He'd left Cheyenne at 11 p.m. with a load of industrial machinery headed for Sacramento. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and Marcus was making good time. His CB crackled occasionally with other drivers checking in, sharing jokes, warning about speed traps. Everything was routine, comfortable, familiar. He'd driven this exact route over 1,000 times. There was no reason to expect anything different. Around 1:30 a.m., somewhere between Rawlins and Rock Springs, Marcus noticed mile marker 237. Nothing unusual about it, just another green sign reflecting his headlights. He was planning to stop at the Little America truck stop, around mile marker 270, grab some coffee, maybe a sandwich. His GPS showed he was making excellent time, estimating arrival at his delivery point 16 hours ahead of schedule. 10 minutes later, he passed mile marker 237 again. Marcus blinked hard, thinking exhaustion was playing tricks on him. But he'd only been driving 2.5 hours. He was alert, focused, nowhere near tired. He checked his GPS. It showed him progressing normally along I-80, moving steadily westward. The map displayed him approaching mile marker 245, but the sign outside his window clearly read 237. He shook his head and kept driving. Maybe he'd misread it. Maybe it was a duplicate sign. Some maintenance error. Wyoming DOT probably had signs mixed up. It happened sometimes. He focused on the road, watching for the next marker. Mile marker 237 appeared 12 minutes later. This time, Marcus slowed down, pulled out his phone, and took a picture as he passed. The image was clear. Mile marker 237, identical to the previous ones. His GPS still showed him progressing westward, now allegedly past mile marker 250. But the physical mile markers told a different story. He was passing the same spot over and over. "Breaker, breaker, this is Mountain Mule," Marcus called on his CB, using his handle. "Anyone else on I-80 westbound between Rawlins and Rock Springs? I got a weird situation here." Static answered him. Then more static. The CB was working. He could hear the carrier wave, but no one responded. On a Thursday night, even at this hour, there should be dozens of trucks on this stretch. Someone should answer. Marcus pressed the accelerator, pushing his rig to 75, then 80 miles per hour. The engine roared, the trailer swayed slightly, and he watched his odometer clicking forward. According to his instruments, he was traveling. According to the GPS, he was traveling. But 15 minutes later, mile marker 237 appeared again in his headlights. He pulled over onto the shoulder, engine idling, hazards flashing. His hands were shaking as he grabbed his phone to call dispatch. No signal. He tried his wife. No signal. Emergency services. No signal. The phone showed full bars but couldn't connect to anything. His satellite GPS worked fine, showing him on I-80, but cellular communication was completely dead. The highway stretched empty in both directions. No cars, no trucks, no lights except his own. The darkness beyond his high beams seemed absolute, swallowing everything. Wyoming nights could be dark, but this was different. This was a darkness that felt thick, heavy, almost liquid. Marcus climbed back in his cab and started driving again. This time, he watched his clock obsessively. At exactly 60 miles per hour, he should pass 1 mile marker per minute. He counted. 1 minute, mile marker 237. 2 minutes, mile marker 237. 5 minutes, mile marker 237. 10 minutes, mile marker 237. He tried driving backwards, putting the truck in reverse and backing up along the shoulder. The mile marker disappeared behind him, and he felt a surge of hope. But when he faced forward and started driving again, mile marker 237 was there, waiting. Around 3 a.m., Marcus noticed something else. His fuel gauge hadn't moved. He'd been driving for over 3 hours, pushing his rig hard, but the gauge still read 3/4 full, exactly where it had been when this nightmare started. His odometer had stopped advancing. The digital clock on his dashboard kept time, but nothing else was changing. He tried different speeds, 40 miles per hour, 90 miles per hour, crawling at 15. Mile marker 237 appeared at exactly the same intervals regardless. He tried driving with his eyes closed, counting to 60 before opening them. Mile marker 237. He tried following the white line on the shoulder instead of the center lines. Mile marker 237. The psychological weight was crushing. Marcus had survived blizzards, mechanical failures, a jackknife incident in Montana that nearly killed him. He'd driven through the night countless times, fought off fatigue, navigated ice storms, and desert heat. But this inability to progress, this imprisonment in motion, was breaking him in ways he'd never experienced. Around 5 a.m., when dawn should have been breaking, the darkness didn't change. The sky remained perfectly black. No stars, no moon, no hint of approaching sunrise. Just endless night and mile marker 237. Marcus tried to stay calm, to think rationally, sighed. He was hallucinating. Carbon monoxide leak, contaminated food, some kind of mental break. He'd heard stories about long-haul truckers snapping, seeing things that weren't there. Maybe this was his breaking point. Maybe he was actually unconscious somewhere, dreaming this nightmare. But the cold air through his window felt real. The vibration of the engine felt real. The sight of mile marker 237 appearing again and again felt horrifyingly, undeniably real. At 6 a.m. by his clock, still complete darkness outside, Marcus made a decision. He couldn't keep driving this loop forever. He pulled over, climbed into his sleeper berth, and closed his eyes. If this was some kind of temporal anomaly, some loop he'd fallen into, maybe stopping would break it. Maybe he needed to wait it out. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. He lay there, listening to the engine idle, feeling his heart hammer in his chest. After what his clock said was 2 hours, he climbed back into the driver's seat. Mile marker 237 stood outside his window, exactly where it had been. Marcus lost track of time after that. His clock kept ticking. 9 a.m., 10 a.m., noon. But the darkness never lifted. He drove and stopped, always seeing the same marker. He screamed. He cried. He beat his fists against the steering wheel until they bled. None of it changed anything. Then, at what his clock said was 2:47 p.m., though it was still completely dark, something changed. In his headlights, mile marker 237 appeared as always. But this time, there was someone standing next to it. A figure in a trucker's jacket, facing away from him. Marcus slammed on the brakes, bringing his rig to a shuddering stop. The figure didn't move. Marcus hit his horn, a long, desperate blast. The figure remained motionless. Marcus climbed down from his cab on shaking legs and approached. As he got closer, he could see the figure more clearly. It was definitely a man, wearing a jacket similar to his own, standing perfectly still beside the mile marker. "Hey," Marcus called out. "Hey, can you help me? I'm stuck here. I can't." The figure turned around, and Marcus's words died in his throat. The face looking back at him was his own, not similar, not a doppelganger. It was him, exact in every detail, down to the 3-day stubble and the coffee stain on his shirt from 2 days ago. The other Marcus smiled sadly and spoke in his voice. "You should have stopped at Little America." Then he turned back toward the mile marker and simply stepped into it, his body merging with the metal post like a ghost passing through a wall. Marcus blinked, and suddenly it was dawn. Real dawn, with pink and orange streaking across the sky. His GPS showed mile marker 270, Little America. His fuel gauge showed a quarter tank. His odometer had jumped forward. According to his instruments, he'd been driving for 8 hours straight without stopping. His phone rang. Dispatch, wondering why he hadn't checked in. His CB crackled with normal traffic. Other trucks were visible on the road ahead and behind him. Marcus pulled into Little America, parked his rig, and called dispatch. He told them he was quitting, effective immediately. He didn't care about his final paycheck, his benefits, or his reputation. He got a friend to come pick him up, left his truck in that parking lot, and never touched a steering wheel again. The authorities found his truck 3 days later. Everything was in order, cargo intact, keys in the ignition. The only oddity was his odometer. It showed exactly 237 miles more than the last documented reading, even though he'd supposedly driven over 400 miles on that route. Marcus never drove again. When people asked why he'd quit such a lucrative career so suddenly, he always gave the same answer. "I found out there are some roads you can't come back from. I was lucky enough to be given a warning." But late at night, he still wakes up sometimes, certain he can hear the sound of his engine idling and see, through his window, the green reflective shine of mile marker 237 appearing one more time. Story 2. The Wrong Denangian Truck Stop. Denise Hartley was 51 years old and had logged over 2 million miles across North America, hauling refrigerated goods in her white Freightliner. She'd earned the CB handle Ice Queen for her cool demeanor and her refrigerated cargo, and she took pride in never missing a delivery, never getting lost, and never letting anything rattle her. She'd driven through hurricanes, dust storms, and once delivered a load despite a broken rib from a loading dock accident. Nothing fazed Denise. Nothing scared her. The night of February 22nd, 2020, changed that forever. She was running a load of frozen seafood from Seattle to Denver, traveling I-90 eastbound through Montana. Around 2 a.m., somewhere between Missoula and Butte, her fuel warning light came on. She'd miscalculated her mileage. Unusual for her, but everyone made mistakes. According to her GPS and her mental map of the route, there should be a Flying J truck stop about 20 miles ahead. She'd stopped there dozens of times before. She knew she could make it. 10 miles later, she saw the sign. Truck stop. Next Exitus. Gas food. Showers. The sign looked slightly off. The typography wasn't quite right. The colors seemed faded in a strange way. But Denise was focused on her fuel gauge. She took the exit, following the ramp down to a service road. The truck stop appeared exactly where it should be, lights bright against the Montana darkness, but something felt wrong immediately. The parking lot was full of trucks, maybe 40 or 50 rigs, all parked in neat rows. But there was no movement, no drivers walking to the building, no lights in any of the truck cabs, no idling engines. And trucks always kept their engines running in February, Montana, to stay warm. The silence was absolute and wrong. Denise pulled up to the diesel pumps, killed her engine, and climbed down. The cold hit her hard, colder than it should be. A biting, unnatural cold that seemed to penetrate through her heavy jacket instantly. Her breath came out in great clouds of vapor. The pumps looked normal, standard commercial diesel pumps with card readers. But when Denise tried to swipe her fleet card, the reader didn't respond. No beep, no screen activation, nothing. She tried her personal credit card. Same result. She tried the emergency payment button. Nothing. "Hello," she called out. "Anyone working here?" Her voice seemed to die in the air, absorbed by the cold and darkness. No echo, no response. Denise looked toward the main building. The lights were on, bright fluorescence visible through the windows. She could see the interior, coffee counter, racks of snacks, a few tables, but no people. Not a single person visible anywhere. She walked toward the building, her boots crunching on the icy pavement. The cold was getting worse, so intense it made her teeth ache. She'd been in negative temperatures before, but this was different. This cold felt malevolent, hungry, wrong. The glass door had a sign, "Open 24 hours." Denise pulled it open and stepped inside. The interior was perfectly normal. Too normal. The coffee was fresh in its pots, steam rising. The hot dogs rotated slowly on their warming rack. Sandwiches sat wrapped in the refrigerated case. Music played softly from overhead speakers, some pop song from the early 2000s that Denise vaguely recognized. Everything looked recently stocked, recently cleaned, recently tended, but there was no one there. "Hello," Denise called again, louder. "Is anyone here?" She walked behind the counter. The register was on, displaying a transaction screen. A half-full cup of coffee sat beside it, still steaming. Someone had been here moments ago. But where had they gone? Denise grabbed her radio from her belt and tried to call out. Static. She pulled out her phone. No signal, though she'd had full bars on the highway just minutes ago. She tried the landline phone behind the counter. Dead silence. Not even a dial tone. A logical part of her brain was screaming at her to leave, to walk back to her truck and figure out another solution. But she needed fuel. Her gauge was on empty. Without diesel, she wasn't going anywhere. And this place clearly had working pumps. They just needed to be activated from inside. She found the pump control system behind the counter and tried to manually authorize pump number 3 where her truck sat. The system accepted her input, showing pump 3 is active. Good. She'd pump her fuel, leave cash on the counter, and get the hell out of here. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something through the window that stopped her cold. Her truck wasn't alone at the pumps anymore. There was another truck parked at pump 4, a red Peterbilt that definitely hadn't been there 2 minutes ago. And then another appeared at pump 5, a blue Kenworth, materializing as if it had always been there. Then another and another. Denise ran outside. The parking lot that had been full of silent, dark trucks was now empty. Completely empty except for her Freightliner and the trucks that were appearing one by one at the pumps. As each new truck appeared, she could see drivers climbing down, all of them moving in the same slow, mechanical way. All of them walking toward the building, toward her. She sprinted to her truck, her heart hammering. Behind her, she could hear footsteps, dozens of footsteps, all in perfect synchronization. She didn't look back. She grabbed her door handle, pulled herself up into the cab, and yanked the door shut. The drivers were surrounding her truck now. Denise finally looked at them, and her blood turned to ice. They all looked exactly like her. Not similar. Exact. 51 years old, weathered skin, short graying hair, her company jacket, her face. Dozens of perfect copies, all staring up at her with empty eyes. One of them, standing directly in front of her truck, raised a hand and pointed back toward the highway. Its mouth moved, and though Denise couldn't hear through the glass, she could read the words. Wrong turn, wrong dimension, go back. Denise didn't need to be told twice. She hit the ignition. Her engine roared to life. Thank God. It started. She checked her fuel gauge. It read 3/4 full. She hadn't pumped any fuel, but somehow her tank had filled itself. She threw the truck into gear and accelerated, not caring about the careful maneuvering usually required in truck stops. She needed to leave. The copies of herself scattered as she drove through them, not running away, but simply stepping aside in that same synchronized motion. Denise hit the service road and accelerated toward the highway entrance ramp. In her mirrors, she could see the truck stop receding behind her, and as she watched, it began to flicker, the lights fading, the building becoming translucent, the dozens of trucks in the parking lot turning ghostly and transparent. By the time she merged back onto I-90, there was nothing behind her but empty Montana darkness. She drove for 6 straight hours without stopping, pushing through to Billings even though she was exhausted and shaking. When she finally stopped at a real, normal, busy truck stop full of real people, she sat in her cab for 30 minutes, just reassuring herself that she was back in the right world. She checked her GPS logs later. According to the satellite data, she'd never left I-90. There was no record of an exit, no stop, no deviation from the highway. According to her truck's computer, she'd driven continuously at 62 miles per hour through that entire section of Montana, but her fuel gauge had somehow gone from nearly empty to 3/4 full. Denise finished her delivery to Denver. Then she drove her truck back to the company depot, turned in her keys, and resigned. She'd spent 30 years on the road. She'd planned to drive until she physically couldn't anymore. But after that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world she thought she knew had cracks in it, thin places where reality bent and twisted into something wrong. There are truck stops that exist between dimensions, she told a friend once after several drinks. Places that aren't quite here and aren't quite there. You can stumble into them if you're tired enough, if conditions are right, if you take the wrong exit at the wrong time. And if you see yourself there, if you see your own face looking back at you, it means you've driven into a place you were never meant to be. It means you are lucky if you get out. She never got back behind the wheel of a commercial truck. These days, Denise drives a small sedan, and she never takes unfamiliar exits at night. She's plotted every route she drives, memorized every landmark, and she absolutely refuses to stop anywhere she hasn't been before. Because she knows that somewhere out there, on some exit that should exist but doesn't quite, there's a truck stop full of mirrors of herself, waiting for the next driver who makes a wrong turn and ends up in the wrong dimension. Story 3. The Hitchhiker. 2%. Robert Chen had been driving long haul for 19 years, specializing in oversized loads, construction equipment, prefabricated buildings, industrial generators. His red Mack truck was equipped with all the necessary permits and warning flags for his wide loads, and he was known throughout the industry for his perfect safety record. Robert was methodical, careful, and by the book. He didn't take risks, didn't cut corners, and absolutely never picked up hitchhikers. The night of June 17, 2018, broke that rule and broke Robert. He was hauling a massive electrical transformer from Houston to Phoenix, traveling I-10 through the empty stretches of West Texas. Around 11 p.m., somewhere between Fort Stockton and Van Horn, his headlights caught a figure on the shoulder. A young woman, maybe 25, wearing a business suit and heels, thumb out in the classic hitchhiker pose. Robert's first instinct was to drive past. He never picked up hitchhikers. Company policy forbade it. Insurance wouldn't cover it, and common sense warned against it. But something about the scene was so wrong that he found himself slowing down. A woman in business attire, in heels, on an empty stretch of Texas highway at 11 p.m. No car visible anywhere, no breakdown lights, no emergency flashers. He pulled over, left his engine running, and climbed down to talk to her. She was Asian, like him, with long black hair and a professional demeanor that seemed completely out of place on this desolate road. "Are you okay?" Robert called out. "Do you need help? I can call someone for you." She walked toward him, and Robert noticed her shoes weren't even dusty. Her suit was immaculate. She looked like she'd just stepped out of an office, not like someone stranded in the Texas desert. "Robert Chen," she said, and his blood chilled. He hadn't told her his name. "I need you to give me a ride to Van Horn. It's very important. If you don't, you're going to die tomorrow at 2:43 p.m. on Highway 60 outside of Socorro, New Mexico." A tire blowout will cause your load to shift and your truck to jackknife. You'll be crushed in the cab. Your wife, Melissa, will receive the call at 3:15 p.m. Your daughter, Emma, will be devastated. Robert stared at her, his mind reeling. She knew his name. She knew his wife's name. She knew his daughter's name. How could she possibly know these things? "Who are you?" he demanded. "How do you know?" "It doesn't matter who I am," she interrupted. "What matters is that I can help you. Give me a ride to Van Horn. Listen to what I tell you. Change your route tomorrow. That's all you need to do." Every rational instinct told Robert to get back in his truck and drive away. This was impossible. She was crazy, or dangerous, or both. But she knew his family's names. She knew details about him that a random stranger couldn't possibly know. And something in her eyes, a terrible, calm certainty, made him believe her. Against every ounce of judgment, Robert heard himself say, "Get in." She climbed up into his passenger seat with an effortless grace that didn't match her business attire and heels. Robert got back behind the wheel, his hands shaking slightly as he shifted into gear. They drove in silence for 5 minutes. Robert kept glancing at her, trying to make sense of this situation. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. "What's your name?" Robert finally asked. "Call me Sarah," she replied. "It's not my real name, but it's close enough." "How do you know about me, about my family?" "Because I'm from your future, Robert. From a timeline where you died tomorrow. I've been sent back to this moment, to this highway, to prevent that death. Yours isn't the only one, but it's one of the ones I can save." Robert wanted to laugh, to dismiss this as insanity, but she spoke with such matter-of-fact conviction that it was more unsettling than if she'd been raving. "That's impossible," he said. "Time travel isn't real. You say that, but you stopped to pick me up. You're listening to me. Some part of you knows I'm telling the truth." She turned to look at him. "Do you want to hear what happens if you don't change your route? Do you want to know exactly how you die?" "No," Robert said quickly. "No, I don't." "Smart. The details would haunt you." She turned back to face forward. "Here's what you need to do. Tomorrow, instead of taking Highway 60 from Magdalena to Socorro, take I-25 north to Albuquerque, then I-40 west. It's longer, adds about 90 minutes to your trip, but you'll live. Your company won't mind the delay if you cite road conditions. Tell them there was debris on Highway 60 and you didn't feel safe with your load. Why don't you just tell me what causes the accident? If I know about the blowout, I can get my tires checked." "It won't matter," she interrupted. "You'll check the tires. They'll be fine. The blowout happens because of a piece of metal debris that isn't on the road yet when you check it. You'd have to know the exact second to swerve, the exact angle to turn your wheel. Believe me, in timelines where you tried that, it went worse. The only solution is to not be on that road at that time." Robert's mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. But what if it was? What if this strange woman really did know his future? Could he afford to ignore her? "What else can you tell me?" he asked. "If you're really from the future, prove it. Tell me something that's going to happen." Sarah smiled sadly. "Tomorrow morning at 8:47 a.m., your wife will call you. She'll tell you that Emma got accepted to Berkeley. You've been worried about whether they could afford it. You'll cry, but you'll try to hide it from Melissa. That call is going to happen, and you need to be alive to receive it." Robert felt his throat tighten. Emma had applied to Berkeley. They were waiting to hear back. How could this woman know that? They drove through Van Horn without stopping. When Robert reminded Sarah that she'd asked for a ride to Van Horn, she just shook her head. "I needed you to pick me up. The destination didn't matter. What matters is that you remember what I told you. Change your route tomorrow." Around 1 a.m., somewhere east of El Paso, Sarah spoke again. "You can let me out here." "Here? There's nothing here. It's the middle of nowhere." I know, but my work is done. You'll remember this conversation. You'll change your route. That's all I needed to accomplish. Robert pulled over, deeply unsettled. Where will you go? How will you? Don't worry about me, Robert. I've got other stops to make, other drivers to warn. This is what I do. Now. She opened the door and climbed down. Before closing it, she looked back at him. Live, well, love your family, and never forget that every moment is borrowed. You're getting more moments than you were supposed to have. Make them count. She closed the door and walked away from the truck, heading not toward the road but directly into the empty desert. Robert watched her in his mirrors, and then she simply vanished. Not gradually, not ducking behind something, but gone in an instant, like she'd never been there. Robert sat there for 10 minutes, breathing hard, trying to process what had happened. Finally, he radioed dispatch, reported everything was fine, and continued to Phoenix. The next morning at 8:47 a.m., his phone rang. It was Melissa. Rob, Emma got into Berkeley. She's going to Berkeley. Robert pulled over onto the shoulder and cried. He told Melissa he'd been cutting onions, that he was just emotional about their daughter growing up. He didn't tell her about Sarah, about the prediction, about any of it. When he reached the junction where Highway 60 split from I-25, Robert hesitated. This was the moment. Did he believe Sarah? Was he really going to change his route based on the word of a mysterious woman who claimed to be from the future? He looked at the photo of Melissa and Emma. He kept on his dashboard. He thought about the call that morning, predicted to the exact minute. He thought about Sarah knowing things she couldn't possibly know. Robert took I-25 north toward Albuquerque. That night, he saw the news report. A massive accident on Highway 60 outside Socorro around 2:45 p.m. A tanker truck had jackknifed after a tire blowout, creating a debris field that caused a pileup involving 6 vehicles, 3 fatalities. The news showed aerial footage of twisted metal and emergency vehicles. Robert's load that day had been an electrical transformer. If he'd been in that accident with that cargo, the weight would have crushed his cab exactly as Sarah had described. He pulled over and vomited on the side of the road. Robert finished his delivery and drove straight back to his Houston depot. He turned in his truck, resigned from his job, and never drove commercially again. He told his wife he wanted to be home more, to see Emma before she left for college. That wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that Robert had been to the edge of something impossible, something that bent the rules of reality, and he'd been given a second chance. Sarah, whoever or whatever she was, had saved his life, but Robert understood that knowing your future, even a future that you changed, was a burden too heavy to carry. Sometimes late at night, he looks out at the highway visible from his house and wonders if Sarah is still out there, still appearing on lonely roads to warn doomed drivers. He wonders how many other people are walking around, living borrowed time, saved by a mysterious woman in business attire, who appears from nowhere and knows impossible things. Robert's safety record remained perfect. He didn't die on June 18, 2018, on Highway 60 outside Socorro, New Mexico, but in some other timeline, the original timeline. He did. And somewhere in that timeline, a version of his wife got a phone call at 3:15 p.m., and a version of his daughter lost her father. He thinks about that other timeline often. He thinks about Sarah and the burden she must carry, knowing all these deaths, all these futures. And he thinks about how thin the line is between the life he's living and the death he escaped. He never drove a truck again, but every year on June 17th, Robert drives out to that stretch of I-10 between Fort Stockton and Van Horn. He parks on the shoulder around 11 p.m. and watches the road, wondering if Sarah will appear again, wondering if another driver will be lucky enough to meet her. She never appears, but Robert keeps watching, because some part of him needs to believe that she's still out there, still saving people, still walking between timelines to give drivers like him one more chance at life. Story 4. The cargo that shouldn't exist. Vincent Morrison had been hauling specialty freight for 14 years, earning a reputation for discretion and reliability. He never asked questions about unusual loads, never discussed his cargo with anyone, and never failed a delivery. That discretion had earned him lucrative contracts with pharmaceutical companies, defense contractors, and scientific research facilities. The weird stuff, as he called it, equipment and materials that came with minimal paperwork and maximum security requirements. On September 3, 2021, Vincent received a pickup order that seemed standard for his line of work. The manifest listed the cargo as research equipment temperature controlled, fragile Class 3 hazmat. The pickup location was a private research facility outside Albuquerque. The delivery destination was a laboratory in Boulder, Colorado. Payment was triple his normal rate, which usually meant either extremely valuable cargo or something unusual enough that the client wanted guaranteed silence. Vincent arrived at the Albuquerque facility at 6 p.m. The building was unmarked, surrounded by security fencing, watched by cameras. A man in a lab coat met him at the loading dock, looking nervous and exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept in days. "You're Vincent Morrison?" the man asked, checking his phone. "The manifest shows—" "I know what the manifest shows," Vincent interrupted. "I need to inspect the cargo, verify the seals, check the temperature requirements. The cargo is pre-sealed. You cannot open the container under any circumstances. Do you understand? Not for any reason. Not even if you hear." He stopped himself. "Just don't open it. The container is equipped with its own power supply and temperature regulation. Don't interfere with it in any way." Vincent had hauled sealed cargo before. The warnings weren't unusual, but something about the man's manner, the way he'd started to say, "even if you hear," and then stopped, set off alarm bells. "What am I hauling?" "Research equipment. That's all you need to know." They loaded the container into Vincent's refrigerated trailer. It was a metal cylinder, about 8 feet long and 4 feet in diameter, covered in warning labels and sealed with electronic locks. Small LED displays showed temperature and pressure readings. Everything looked professional and standard. Vincent signed the paperwork, verified the seals, and started his drive to Boulder. The route was simple: I-25 north through New Mexico and Colorado, about 7 hours total. He'd deliver the cargo around 2 a.m., collect his payment, and head home. Easy money. The first 3 hours were routine. Vincent listened to podcasts, monitored his cargo temperature through his trailer's remote system, and made good time. Traffic was light, weather was clear. Everything was perfect. Then, around 10 p.m., somewhere north of Santa Fe, Vincent heard something. A sound from the trailer. A metallic tapping, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. 3 beats, then silence, then 3 beats again. Vincent told himself it was just the cargo settling. Temperature fluctuations causing metal to expand or contract. He'd hauled sensitive equipment before. Strange sounds happened. Nothing to worry about. But the tapping continued, and after 10 minutes it changed. Instead of 3 taps, it became a more complex pattern. Tap, tap, pause, tap, pause. Tap, tap, tap. Vincent's hands tightened on the wheel. That wasn't random. That was deliberate. That was a pattern, a rhythm, almost like Morse code. Vincent knew Morse code. His father had been a Navy radio man, had taught it to him as a kid, and what he was hearing from the trailer sounded like Morse code. 3 short taps, 3 long taps, 3 short taps. SOS, his blood ran cold. That was impossible. The cargo was research equipment, sealed equipment. There couldn't be anyone or anything in there sending distress signals. He was imagining it, or the sounds were coincidental, or the tapping changed again. This time it spelled out something longer, letter by letter. H-E-L-P. Vincent pulled over onto the shoulder, his heart hammering. This wasn't possible. This wasn't happening. He climbed out of the cab and walked back to his trailer, his breath visible in the cold mountain air. He pressed his ear against the trailer's wall. The tapping continued. Clear, deliberate, unmistakable. H-E-L-P. Then L-E-T-M-E-O-U-T. No, Vincent whispered. No, no, no. He pulled out his phone to call the client, but there was no answer. He tried the delivery contact in Boulder. Voicemail. He tried dispatch, closed for the night. He was alone on a dark highway with cargo that was communicating with him in Morse code, begging to be released. Vincent returned to his cab, locked the doors, and sat there shaking. He should just keep driving, deliver the cargo, collect his money, and forget this ever happened. It wasn't his business what the cargo was or what it contained. He was just the delivery driver. But the tapping continued, audible even through the cab wall. H-E-L-P, over and over. H-E-L-P. Vincent started driving again, but now his mind was racing. What was he carrying? What could send Morse code from inside a sealed container? The obvious answer, a person, was impossible. The container wasn't big enough to sustain a human being for long. There were no life support systems visible, and no legitimate research facility would ship a person in cargo unless it wasn't a legitimate research facility. Unless he'd been hired to transport something illegal, something horrible. Human trafficking, illegal imprisonment. He could be an unwitting accomplice to a crime, but the warnings, don't open it under any circumstances, not even if you hear. They'd known he might hear something. They'd known whatever was inside might try to communicate, and they'd specifically warned him not to open it. Vincent's phone rang, making him jump. It was a blocked number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Morrison. The voice was cold, professional, female. You're experiencing some concerns about your cargo. I need you to listen carefully. What you're hearing is not what you think it is. The cargo is generating sounds as part of its normal operation. There is no person in that container. There is no distress. Continue your delivery as scheduled. How did you know? The container is equipped with sensors. We monitor it remotely. The sounds you're hearing are a side effect of the equipment's operation. You're perfectly safe. The cargo is perfectly safe. Complete your delivery and everything will be fine. She hung up before Vincent could respond. The tapping changed. Now it was frantic, desperate. N-O-T-S-A-F-E-D-A-N-G-E-R. They were listening. Someone or something knew the container was being monitored. The tapping grew more insistent. P-L-E-A-S-E-O-P-E-N-N-O-W. Vincent pulled over again, this time under a highway light. He walked back to the trailer and examined the container through the open doors. The LED displays still showed normal temperature and pressure. The electronic seals were intact. Nothing looked wrong, except the tapping, the desperate, pleading tapping. Vincent made a decision. He couldn't deliver this. He couldn't complete this job. Whatever was in that container, person, animal, experimental creature, something else, he couldn't be part of transporting it against its will. He'd break the seals, open the container, and deal with the consequences. He reached for the electronic lock. The tapping stopped. Complete silence. Then a new sound emerged. A low, resonant humming that vibrated through the trailer's walls. It grew louder, more intense, until Vincent could feel it in his bones. The LED displays on the container flickered. The temperature reading spiked, climbing rapidly. 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Vincent backed away from the trailer as the humming intensified. The container was glowing now, a faint blue luminescence emanating from its seams. The temperature display hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit, then 120 degrees Fahrenheit, still climbing, and then the tapping returned, but different, aggressive, threatening. N-O-S-T-A-Y, a W-A-Y, D-A-N-G-E-R-O-U-S. Vincent ran back to his cab and drove. He drove fast, breaking speed limits, desperate to get this cargo to its destination and be done with it. The humming continued, audible even over his engine. The glow from his trailer was visible in his mirrors, pulsing like a heartbeat. His phone rang again, the same blocked number. "Mr. Morrison, pull over immediately and step away from your vehicle." "What?" "No. What the hell is in that container?" "It's contained. It's supposed to be contained. The disturbance you caused by attempting to open it has triggered a response. You need to exit the vehicle now." "What kind of response? What am I carrying?" "Something that was never meant to exist. A mistake, an experiment that went wrong. We're transporting it to a facility that can properly dispose of it. But if you breach containment, if you open that container, it will escape. And Mr. Morrison, you don't want to see what happens then. So there is something alive in there." "Not alive. Not in any sense you'd understand. It exists. That's the best description I can give you. It exists, and it's aware, and it wants out." The tapping, the Morse code, that's not communication. That's mimicry. It heard your thoughts, sensed your expectations, and it's showing you what you want to see. It's trying to manipulate you into opening the container. That's insane. Complete your delivery now, before it escalates further. Vincent hung up and pressed the accelerator. Boulder was still 2 hours away. 2 hours with whatever was in his trailer. 2 hours listening to the tapping, the humming, watching the glow in his mirrors. The tapping changed again. This time it wasn't Morse code. It was his name, spelled out letter by letter. V-I-N-C-E-N-T. Then I-K-N-O-W-Y-O-U. Vincent felt tears streaming down his face. He didn't know what he was carrying, but it knew him. It had read him somehow, understood him, and now it was using that knowledge against him. For the next hour, the thing in the container tapped out everything. His address, his phone number, his mother's maiden name, his childhood traumas, his fears, his secrets. It knew everything about him, pulling information from somewhere. His mind, his memories, some metaphysical connection Vincent couldn't understand. And then it tapped out the worst thing. I-W-I-L-F-I-N-D-Y-O-U. A F-T-E-R. Vincent reached Boulder at 1:30 a.m. and drove straight to the delivery facility. Men in hazmat suits were waiting. They unloaded the container with mechanical equipment, never touching it directly. The glow had faded. The humming had stopped. But as they wheeled it away, Vincent swore he saw the container vibrate once, twice, 3 times, 3 taps. The last message. Vincent collected his payment in cash and drove home. He never took another specialty freight job. He couldn't. Every time he tried to sleep, he heard the tapping. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that blue glow. And late at night, when the house was quiet, he sometimes heard it still. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. He moved twice, changed his phone number 3 times, but he knows it doesn't matter. Whatever was in that container, whatever impossible thing he transported that night, it knew him. It memorized him. And somewhere in a disposal facility in Boulder, or maybe somewhere else, if it escaped, it remembers. It waits. Vincent tells himself the research facility destroyed it, contained it, made it stop existing. But he doesn't believe that. because sometimes when he's driving at night, when the road is empty and dark, he sees trucks pass by with glowing trailers, and he knows he's not the only one. He knows there are other drivers carrying things that shouldn't exist, things that tap and hum and glow, things that learn your name and promise to find you after. He'll never drive long haul again. The money isn't worth it. Nothing is worth the knowledge that there are cargoes out there that can reach into your mind, learn who you are, and mark you forever. Vincent Morrison drove trucks for 14 years. Now he stocks shelves at a grocery store, works day shifts only, and never, ever answers calls from blocked numbers. Story 5. The voice on the CB radio. William Bill. Patterson had been driving over the road for 27 years, and in all that time his CB radio had been his constant companion. CB handled Longhorn Bill. He was known up and down the I-35 corridor for his friendly chatter, weather updates, and willingness to help fellow drivers. The CB radio was more than communication. It was community, connection, a way to fight the loneliness of endless miles. On March 8, 2019, Bill's CB radio picked up something it shouldn't have. He was hauling automobile parts from Dallas to Kansas City, running I-35 northbound through Oklahoma. Around midnight, somewhere between Oklahoma City and the Kansas border, his CB crackled with the usual nighttime traffic. Drivers discussing weather, warning about speed traps, making jokes, standard stuff. Then a new voice broke in. Female, with a strange accent. Bill couldn't quite place. Not Southern, not Midwest, but something in between. Static laced through every word. Breaker, breaker. This is Phantom Rider. Any trucks northbound on I-35, you need to know about the jackknife at mile marker 142. 2 trucks, a 4-wheeler, complete road closure. Emergency services are 30 minutes out. Take the exit at mile marker 138. Use the service roads to bypass. Repeat, major accident at mile marker 142. Bill was currently at mile marker 95. He had plenty of time to react if there was really an accident ahead. He keyed his mic. This is Longhorn Bill. Copy that, Phantom Rider. Can you confirm the location? I'm not seeing any traffic reports. For I-35, no response, but other drivers started responding. Longhorn Bill, this is Desert Fox. I'm at mile marker 130. No sign of any accident. Roads are clear. Desert Fox, Longhorn Bill copies. Phantom Rider, what's your 20? Still no response from the female voice. Bill checked his smartphone's traffic app. No accidents reported on I-35. No delays shown anywhere in Oklahoma. He shrugged it off. Maybe a confused driver. Maybe someone on the wrong channel. Or with faulty equipment. He kept driving, chatting, occasionally with other truckers. When he passed mile marker 138, he looked for the exit the voice had mentioned. There was an exit there, but it led to a small county road, barely wide enough for his rig. He stayed on the highway. At mile marker 142, Bill's blood turned to ice. There was an accident, a massive accident. 2 trucks jackknifed across both northbound lanes. A sedan crushed between them. Debris scattered across the highway. Emergency lights were just arriving. Police, fire trucks, ambulances. The accident was fresh, so recent that flames were still visible from one of the truck cabs. Bill slammed on his brakes, bringing his rig to a shuddering stop about 200 feet from the wreckage. In his mirrors, he could see other trucks stopping behind him. Emergency personnel were waving traffic off the highway onto the shoulder, trying to establish a detour. Bill grabbed his CB mic with shaking hands. Breaker, breaker, this is Longhorn Bill. The accident at mile marker 142 is confirmed. Phantom Rider was right. Both lanes completely blocked. Other drivers confirmed, their voices tense and confused. Desert Fox came back on. But I was at mile marker 130 10 minutes ago. There was no accident. How did this happen so fast? Bill didn't have an answer. Emergency services were still arriving, which meant the accident had just happened, probably within the last 5 minutes. But the woman on the CB had warned about it when Bill was at mile marker 95, at least 30 minutes before it occurred. "Phantom Rider," Bill called on the CB. "This is Longhorn Bill. Your warning was accurate. Thank you. Can you identify yourself?" Static answered. Then, faintly, the same female voice. "You're welcome. Longhorn Bill. Drive safe." Bill tried to respond, but the channel had gone silent. Over the next hour, as emergency crews cleared the accident and traffic slowly resumed, Bill questioned every driver he could reach on the CB. No one else had heard the warning. No one knew who Phantom Rider was. As far as anyone else was concerned, the female voice had never existed. Bill convinced himself he'd misremembered the timing. Maybe the warning had come later than he thought. Maybe the accident had been developing earlier, and he just hadn't recognized the signs. The human brain played tricks under stress. He completed his delivery to Kansas City and started the return trip to Dallas the next night. Around the same time, midnight, he was passing through Oklahoma again, this time southbound, and the CB crackled. "Breaker, breaker, this is Phantom Rider. Any trucks southbound on I-35, you need to know about the disabled vehicle in the left lane at mile marker 73. No lights, no warning triangles, completely dark. Speed limit area, but very dangerous. Use caution or move to the right lane." Bill's hands tightened on the wheel. He was currently at mile marker 105, heading south toward mile marker 73. He keyed his mic immediately. "Phantom Rider, this is Longhorn Bill. Confirm your warning. How do you know about this vehicle?" "I just know. Longhorn Bill. Be careful." "Phantom Rider, what's your CB handle? What company are you driving for? Where?" The static cut off her response, but Bill caught fragments. "Don't drive anymore. Trying to help. Can't explain. Please, just be careful." Bill switched lanes to the right and slowed down. Sure enough, at mile marker 73, there was a dark SUV sitting in the left lane with no lights, no hazards, completely invisible until Bill's headlights hit it. If he'd been in the left lane at his normal speed, he would have plowed directly into it. He reported it immediately on the CB and to 911, then pulled over safely. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. Over the next 3 months, Bill heard Phantom Rider 7 more times. Always late at night, always on I-35 in Oklahoma. Always warning about accidents or hazards that hadn't happened yet, but always did, exactly as she described, within 20 to 30 minutes. Other drivers never heard her. Bill started recording his CB audio, but when he played back the recordings, Phantom Rider's voice wasn't there. Only his responses, talking to static and silence. He became obsessed. He researched CB radio anomalies, time slips, precognition. He found stories of other drivers who'd heard impossible warnings, but nothing concrete. Nothing that explained how someone could warn about accidents before they happened. The 8th time Bill heard Phantom Rider's voice, he was ready. He'd equipped his truck with audio recording equipment, multiple CB radios, and a smartphone ready to document everything. "Breaker, breaker, this is Phantom Rider. Longhorn Bill, if you're listening, I need to tell you something important." Bill grabbed his mic. "Phantom Rider, I'm here. I'm listening. Please, who are you? How are you doing this?" "My name was Rebecca Morris. CB handle Phantom Rider. I drove for Western Express. I died on I-35 at mile marker 89 on March 7th, 2012. A drunk driver crossed the median. I died instantly. But Longhorn Bill, I'm still here. I'm still driving, and I can see things before they happen now. I can see the accidents. I can see the danger. So I warn people. I try to save them. Bill felt his throat close. March 7th, 2012. That was 7 years ago. One day before the first time he'd heard her voice. "Rebecca," he said carefully, if you're not alive, how are you on the CB? How can I hear you? I don't know. I don't understand it myself, but every night I drive this highway. I see the accidents before they happen. I see the dangers, and I try to warn people. You're the only one who hears me, Bill. You're the only one who listens. Thank you for listening. Rebecca, I don't know what to say. I don't know if this is real. It's real. I wish it wasn't. I wish I could move on, go wherever I'm supposed to go, but I'm stuck here, on this highway, watching people die and trying to prevent it. Sometimes I succeed. Most times I don't. But when someone like you listens, when you actually heed the warnings, it means everything. How can I help you? How can I help you move on? Static filled the CB for a long moment. Then, you can't. But you can help others. Keep listening. Keep warning people. And Bill, get off this highway. Stop driving I-35. Something bad is coming for you. I can see it. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. Change your routes. Don't drive through Oklahoma anymore. Please. What's coming? What do you see? I see your truck on fire at mile marker 115. I see emergency services arriving too late. I see your wife getting the call. Bill, I've tried to save you, but I can't change some things. All I can do is warn you. Stop driving this route. Stop now. The CB went dead. Bill pulled over, his whole body shaking. He sat there for an hour, trying to process what he'd heard. Then he pulled up historical records on his phone. He searched for Rebecca Morris, truck driver, I-35, Oklahoma, 2012. He found the accident report, March 7th, 2012, mile marker 89, southbound I-35. Driver Rebecca Morris, age 34, killed instantly when a drunk driver crossed the median. She'd been driving for Western Express. Her CB handle was listed in her obituary. Phantom Rider. Bill completed his delivery and drove home. The next day, he told his dispatcher he wouldn't drive I-35 through Oklahoma anymore. They tried to argue it was his primary route, his specialty. They threatened to fire him. He said, "Fine." They didn't fire him. Instead, they reassigned him to different routes. Bill never drove through Oklahoma again. 3 weeks later, on I-35 at mile marker 115 in Oklahoma, a truck transporting industrial chemicals overturned and exploded after a tire blowout. The driver, who'd been given Bill's old route, died in the fire. The emergency services arrived 12 minutes later. The man's widow got the call at 2:47 p.m. Bill read about it online and broke down crying. That should have been him. That was his route, his truck, his delivery. Rebecca Morris, 7 years dead, had saved his life by warning him off the highway. He never heard her voice again. But every year, on March 7th, Bill drives to mile marker 89 on I-35 in Oklahoma. He pulls over on the shoulder, gets out of his car, and speaks into his old CB radio mic. "Phantom Rider, this is Longhorn Bill. Thank you. Thank you for saving my life. I hope you found peace. I hope you've moved on. But if you're still out there, still driving, still warning people, thank you. Thank you for everything." He never gets a response. But sometimes when he's driving late at night on other highways, his CB crackles with static, and he thinks he hears a faint female voice saying, "Drive safe." Bill retired from long-haul trucking 2 years later. The memory of Rebecca Morris's warnings, the knowledge that he'd been talking to someone who died 7 years ago, the certainty that he'd escaped his own death because a ghost took the time to warn him. It was too much to carry. He runs a small auto repair shop now, close to home, never on the road overnight. But he keeps his old CB radio in his office turned on and tuned to channel 19. And sometimes, late at night when the shop is quiet, he hears fragments of warnings, accidents that haven't happened yet, dangers that are coming, a phantom rider still trying to save people from the death she couldn't escape. Some roads are haunted. Some highways carry more than just traffic. And some voices on the CB radio are warnings from the beyond, delivered by drivers who loved the road so much that not even death could make them stop trying to help their fellow truckers. Bill Patterson knows this is true, and he'll carry that knowledge, that gratitude, and that survivor's guilt for the rest of his life. Story 6. The Highway That Goes Both Ways. Terrence Walsh, CB Handle Whiskey Tango, had driven trucks for 31 years across 48 states. He prided himself on never getting lost, maintaining perfect logs, and knowing the highway system better than any GPS. He'd memorized routes, alternative paths, shortcuts that weren't on any map. Navigation was instinct for Terrence, as natural as breathing. The night of April 15, 2020 destroyed that instinct forever. Terrence was hauling electronics from Portland, Oregon to Boise, Idaho. The route was simple: I-84 east through the Columbia River Gorge, then continue east into Idaho. He'd driven it hundreds of times. The highway was familiar, predictable, safe. Around 1 a.m., somewhere between Pendleton and La Grande, Terrence noticed something odd. The highway seemed narrower than usual, the lanes slightly compressed. He dismissed it, probably just tired eyes, shadows playing tricks in his peripheral vision. But then he passed a mile marker, 243. He knew that marker. It was about 60 miles ahead of his current position. He checked his GPS. It showed him at mile marker 185. 58 miles separated these two positions. Yet he'd just passed mile marker 243. Terrence shook his head and kept driving. Must have misread the sign. Must have been a different number. His GPS was accurate. He trusted technology over his tired eyes. 10 minutes later, he passed another mile marker. 178. That was backward. He was heading east. Mile markers should be increasing, not decreasing. And mile marker 178 was behind him now, several miles back, according to his GPS. He'd already passed it an hour ago. Terrence slowed down and pulled over to check his bearings. His GPS showed him on I-84 eastbound, progressing normally. His odometer showed he'd traveled the correct distance. His compass app pointed east. Every instrument told him he was moving in the right direction, but the mile markers were going backward. He keyed his CB radio. Breaker, breaker. This is Whiskey Tango on I-84, eastbound near La Grande. Anyone else seeing something weird with the mile markers tonight? Static, no response. On a Wednesday night, even late, there should be traffic. There should be other trucks, other drivers, someone on the CB. But the channel was silent except for the empty hiss of static. Terrence started driving again, watching the mile markers obsessively now. Mile marker 165, mile marker 151, mile marker 138. They were counting down, descending, going backward despite his eastward travel. His GPS insisted he was approaching mile marker 210. His eyes showed him passing mile marker 126. After 30 minutes of this discrepancy, Terrence made a decision. He'd find an exit, get off the highway, recalibrate somehow. Maybe there was construction. Maybe the mile markers had been replaced incorrectly. Whatever was happening, he needed to stop and figure it out. But he drove for 20 miles without seeing a single exit. The green exit signs that should appear every few miles were absent. The highway stretched endlessly forward. 2 lanes of eastbound traffic, though he was the only vehicle on it, with no off-ramps, no rest areas, no services. and the mile markers kept counting backward. Mile marker 94, mile marker 72, mile marker 56. Terrence tried to turn around, to do a U-turn across the median and head back west. But when he slowed down and checked his mirrors to execute the maneuver, something impossible happened. Behind him, the highway also stretched east, not west back the way he came, east. Both directions, forward and backward from his truck, showed the highway heading east. The sun, which should still be hours from rising, was visible on both horizons, twin dawns breaking simultaneously. Terrence pulled over again, this time climbing out of his cab in a panic. He walked to the front of his truck, looked east down the highway. Then he walked to the back of his truck, looked at what should have been west, but was somehow also east. The highway stretched identically in both directions, indistinguishable, identical, going the same direction both ways. He got back in his truck and just drove. What else could he do? He picked a direction, the one his hood was pointing, and drove. Mile markers counted backward, 31, 27, 15, 8. At mile marker 0, Terrence expected something to change. The end of the highway, a state border, something. But the highway just continued, and the next mile marker read 318. He'd reached the end of the mile marker system for I-84 in Oregon and looped back to the beginning. But he hadn't crossed any state lines. He hadn't passed through any towns. He just continued on the same endless highway that stretched east in both directions. Terrence drove for 6 hours. His fuel gauge didn't move. It stayed at half full no matter how long he drove. His odometer didn't advance. The clock on his dashboard ticked forward, but nothing else changed. The dual sunrise in both directions never actually rose. The sun stayed perpetually at the horizon, casting long shadows that came from both sides simultaneously. The mile markers cycled. He passed through the complete range twice, watching the numbers count backward from 318 to 0, then jump back to 318 again. The third time through, he started recognizing specific markers: a slight bend in the road near marker 247, a damaged reflector on marker 132. He was looping, traveling the same stretch of highway over and over, going east in both directions, trapped in some impossible geometry. Around 7 a.m. according to his dashboard clock. Though the twin suns remained locked at the horizon, Terrence saw something new. Another truck, heading toward him in what should have been the opposite direction, but was somehow also eastbound. The truck was identical to his. Same model Freightliner. Same color, same company logo. As it approached, Terrence could see the driver through the windshield. The driver was him, not similar, not a lookalike. It was Terrence Walsh, exact in every detail, driving an identical truck in the opposite direction on a highway that only went one way. The two trucks passed each other. Terrence looked into his own eyes as he went by. The other Terrence looked back, his face showing the same horror and confusion. Then the truck was behind him, receding in his mirrors, heading east, just like he was. Terrence grabbed his CB. "This is Whiskey Tango. Is anyone there? Can anyone hear me?" His own voice answered. "This is Whiskey Tango. Is anyone there? Can anyone hear me?" Not an echo, not a delay. His exact words, in his exact voice, spoken simultaneously with his transmission. "Who are you?" Terrence demanded. "Who are you?" His own voice asked at the same instant. Terrence released the mic button and just listened. His voice continued. "I'm stuck on I-84. The highway goes both directions. The mile markers are backward. I keep seeing myself. I don't know how to get out." Those were Terrence's thoughts, his exact situation, spoken by his own voice on the radio. Somehow the highway had duplicated him, or he'd encountered another version of himself, or he'd split into multiple instances. He drove faster, accelerating to 80, then 90 miles per hour. In his mirrors, he could see multiple trucks now, all identical to his, all heading east in the direction he'd come from. Dozens of them, hundreds, an infinite chain of Terrence Walsh driving identical trucks on an impossible highway. Then he saw it ahead, a single exit sign, the first he'd seen in hours. It simply read, "Exit next right." No route number, no destination, no services, just an exit. Terrence took it without hesitation. The off-ramp curved right, descending toward nothing. The ramp didn't lead to a road or a town. It led to gray emptiness, a void of nothing. But Terrence kept going, because anything was better than that infinite highway. The gray consumed his truck. Vision went blank. Sound disappeared. He felt motion, but couldn't see or hear anything. His hands gripped the wheel, but he couldn't see his hands. Time stretched, compressed, lost meaning. Then color returned. Sound returned. Terrence was on I-84, a normal highway heading east. His GPS showed him near La Grande, Oregon. At mile marker 261, morning traffic flowed around him. Cars, trucks, normal vehicles going normal speeds in normal directions. His CB crackled with regular chatter. His fuel gauge showed empty. He'd been driving for 8 hours. His odometer had advanced normally. Everything was regular, ordinary, real. Terrence pulled off at the next exit and stopped at a truck stop. He bought fuel, used the restroom, got coffee. Everything was wonderfully, beautifully normal. Other drivers walked past him, talking on phones, complaining about weather. Real people in a real world. He checked his delivery schedule. He was 8 hours behind, which matched the time on his clock. But in his memory, he'd driven for much longer than 8 hours. He'd driven through days' worth of highway loops, seeing himself infinitely, heading east in both directions. Terrence called his dispatcher and quit. He couldn't explain it. Just said he was done, effective immediately. They were angry, threatening to withhold pay. He didn't care. He had another job lined up anyway. Anything that didn't involve long-haul driving. He never drove commercially again. The experience had broken something fundamental in his understanding of space and navigation. Roads, which had always made sense to him, which had always followed logical rules and physical laws, could bend, could loop, could go both directions at once while only going one direction, could trap you in impossible geometry. Terrence took a job as a warehouse manager, working only day shifts, never traveling more than 10 miles from his home. He'd spent 31 years on the road. He'd planned to drive until he physically couldn't anymore. But after experiencing the highway that went both ways, after seeing infinite versions of himself trapped in an eternal eastward loop, he couldn't trust roads anymore. Sometimes at night, he dreams about that highway. He dreams about the dual sunrise, the backward mile markers, the infinite chain of trucks stretching behind him. He dreams about taking that exit into gray nothingness, and wonders what would have happened if he'd just kept driving the loop forever. Would he still be there? One more Terrence Walsh, in an infinite chain of drivers trapped on a highway that defies geometry. Or did all those other versions of himself find the exit too, escaping back to reality one by one? He doesn't know. He'll never know. But Terrence Walsh learned something that cost him his career. There are roads that don't follow the rules. There are highways that exist in spaces between normal geometry. And if you're unlucky enough to find yourself on one, the best thing you can do is take any exit offered, no matter where it leads. Because staying on that road means driving forever in directions that shouldn't exist. Story 7. The Static Bedouin Stations. Raymond Porter had been driving long haul for 16 years, specializing in night runs along the I-10 corridor from Los Angeles to Phoenix. He preferred driving at night, less traffic, cooler temperatures, and the solitude gave him time to think. Raymond was a quiet man, divorced, no kids, whose life revolved around his Peterbilt truck and the endless ribbon of highway. He didn't listen to CB radio much. Instead, he preferred FM radio, constantly scanning for music stations as he traveled through the desert. The radio was his companion, filling the silence with music, news, occasional late-night talk shows. He'd learned which stations had the best range, which would fade out where, and how to time his scanning to always have something to listen to. On November 4th, 2017, Raymond discovered there were things broadcast between the stations that weren't meant to be heard. He left Los Angeles around 10 p.m., hauling a load of furniture to Phoenix. The drive was routine, familiar, almost meditative in its predictability. As he passed through Riverside County, he scanned through his radio presets, looking for something to listen to. Rock station, country station, Spanish language station, news station, all familiar frequencies. Around midnight, somewhere between Indio and Blythe, Raymond was scanning for a new station when his radio briefly caught something between 94.3 and 94.7 FM. Not static, not silence, but a voice, a woman's voice, speaking calmly. November 4th, 2017, Interstate 10, eastbound, mile marker 103. Raymond Porter in a dark blue Peterbilt, carrying furniture, blood type O positive, divorced, no children, nobody to miss him. Raymond's hand froze on the tuning knob. The voice continued for maybe 5 seconds before the radio slid past the frequency and caught a normal country station. But in those 5 seconds, the voice had described him, his exact situation, his blood type. How could anyone know his blood type over the radio? He twisted the tuning knob back, trying to find that frequency again. Scanned slowly between 94.3 and 94.7. Nothing but static. Just normal radio static. The empty space between stations where nothing should broadcast. Raymond told himself he'd misheard. Maybe it was a traffic report, and his brain, tired and half-focused, had filled in familiar details. Maybe it was a weird ad for an insurance company. Maybe he'd imagined it entirely. He kept driving, settling on a rock station, trying to forget about the voice. 20 minutes later, he scanned past another gap in frequencies, this time between 97.1 and 97.5. The voice returned, clearer now. Excellent vital organs, healthy despite smoking, habit, accident at mile marker 127 and 43 minutes, extraction at mile marker 129, buyer waiting in black Mercedes, payment already transferred. Raymond yanked his hand away from the radio, like it had burned him. His heart was hammering. What the fuck was that? What did it mean by extraction and buyer? What organs? What accident? He pulled over onto the shoulder, hands shaking. The radio continued playing its rock station normally. Everything seemed fine. Everything seemed normal. Except Raymond had just heard something impossible. Something describing him, predicting an accident, talking about organs and buyers. He pulled out his phone to call 911 to report. What? A weird radio transmission? They'd think he was crazy. He called his dispatcher instead, but there was no answer at this hour. He tried his ex-wife. No answer. He was alone on a dark highway with a radio that somehow knew things it shouldn't. Raymond made a decision. He'd find a rest area, pull over for a few hours, let whatever was supposed to happen at mile marker 127 not happen. If there was an accident there, he wouldn't be part of it. He started driving again, watching for the next rest area sign. According to his GPS, there was one about 12 miles ahead. He'd make it there, park, and wait out this nightmare. But as he drove, his radio started acting strangely. The rock station began to fade. Even though he was well within range, other stations started breaking through, overlapping, creating a cacophony of sounds. And beneath all of it, Raymond could hear that voice, speaking constantly, describing things. Truck approaching mile marker 115, speed 62 miles per hour. Will reach 127 at 12:47 a.m. Extraction team ready. Medical equipment prepared. Organs viable for 3 recipients. Heart for Phoenix. Kidneys for Las Vegas. Liver for San Diego. Raymond punched the radio off button. Silence filled the cab. But seconds later, the radio turned itself back on. Cannot escape it. Raymond Porter. The buyers have paid. The accident is scheduled. Extraction team is professional. You'll be harvested efficiently. No, Raymond screamed at the radio. No, no, no. This isn't real. He tried changing channels, but every station was the same voice now. Overlapping, speaking over news and music and static. All of them describing his impending death, the planned accident, the organ harvesting that was apparently scheduled for mile marker 127. Raymond floored the accelerator, pushing his rig to 75 miles per hour. If he was going to die at mile marker 127, he'd drive past it so fast that whatever was planned couldn't happen. He'd outrun the prophecy, outrun the accident, outrun whatever nightmare was speaking through his radio. Mile marker 120 passed. Mile marker 123. His truck was shaking, the furniture in his trailer shifting dangerously at this speed, but Raymond didn't care. Mile marker 125. Almost there. Almost past the danger zone. At mile marker 127, Raymond's left front tire exploded. He'd been expecting it, dreading it, and yet when it happened, the violence of it still shocked him. The truck lurched hard left toward the median. Raymond fought the wheel, trying to correct, but the blown tire made control nearly impossible. His training kicked in. Don't hit the brakes hard. Don't overcorrect. Let the truck slow, gradually. But this wasn't a normal blowout. The tire had been sabotaged somehow. Or the prediction on the radio had been so specific because the accident was engineered. Either way, Raymond's truck was sliding, jackkniffing, the trailer swinging wide as he fought for control. He brought the truck to a stop on the shoulder, heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. He was alive, shaken, terrified, but alive. The accident hadn't killed him. The radio, which had gone silent during the crisis, spoke again. Target immobilized at mile marker 127. Extraction team dispatched. ETA 4 minutes. Raymond looked in his mirrors. About half a mile back, headlights were approaching. Not the normal flow of traffic. These lights were moving fast, closing the distance rapidly. A black Mercedes. Raymond didn't wait. He climbed down from his cab, left the truck running, and ran. He sprinted across the highway, over the median, and into the empty desert. Behind him, he could hear vehicles stopping, doors opening, voices calling. "Mr. Porter, wait, we just want to help." Raymond kept running. The desert was dark, treacherous, full of rocks and cacti and holes. He fell twice, scraped his hands and knees, but kept going. Behind him, flashlight beams swept the darkness, searching. He ran for maybe 15 minutes before his lungs gave out. He collapsed behind a large boulder, gasping for breath, listening. The voices were distant now. The flashlight beams weren't visible anymore. Maybe they'd given up. Maybe. His phone rang. Raymond stared at it in horror. The number wasn't saved, just a string of digits. Against every instinct, he answered. "Hello, Raymond." The voice from the radio. Female, calm, professional. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. The buyers are very disappointed. We have contracts. You were scheduled for processing." "Who are you?" Raymond gasped. "How did you?" "We broadcast on frequencies between the stations. That's where we live, Raymond. In the spaces between. We identify suitable subjects, lone drivers, no families, healthy organs, and we schedule their acquisitions. It's very efficient. You weren't supposed to hear the broadcast. That was a technical error. But now that you have, you understand that we can't just let you go. You know too much. I'll go to the police. I'll tell everyone and tell them what? That voices on your radio predicted an accident. That you ran from people offering help. Raymond, you sound insane. Nobody will believe you. But we believe you. And we'll be waiting. She hung up. Raymond sat in the darkness for 3 hours until dawn broke over the desert. When full daylight arrived, he carefully made his way back to the highway. His truck was gone, not towed, gone, like it had never been there. The black Mercedes was gone. There was no evidence of the blown tire, no debris, no skid marks. The shoulder where he'd stopped was pristine, undisturbed. Raymond walked to the nearest town, 15 miles through the desert. He reported his truck stolen. The police found no record of it. His company said he'd called in the previous night claiming to be sick, had parked the truck at a facility in Blythe, and had turned in his keys. They had documentation, his signature, his voice on the phone call, security camera footage showing him parking the truck. Except Raymond had never been to that facility. He'd never made that call. Someone or something had created an entire false history of that night to make his story impossible. Raymond quit trucking immediately. He couldn't drive anymore, couldn't trust the roads, couldn't listen to the radio without paranoia. But more than that, he knew they were still out there. The voices between stations, the extraction teams, the buyers who wanted healthy organs from lone drivers who nobody would miss. He moved to a city, got a job in retail, and stopped driving entirely. He doesn't own a car, takes public transportation, and never travels at night. And he absolutely never ever listens to FM radio, because he knows that between the stations, in those empty frequencies where nothing should broadcast, there are voices, voices that watch the highways, voices that identify targets, voices that schedule acquisitions. Raymond Porter was supposed to die on November 4th, 2017, at mile marker 127 on Interstate 10. His organs were supposed to be harvested and distributed to buyers across the Southwest, but he heard the broadcast between stations, and he ran, and he survived. He doesn't know how many other drivers weren't so lucky. How many lone truckers, people with no families, nobody to miss them, vanished on dark highways while voices between radio stations scheduled their deaths. But Raymond knows they're out there, broadcasting their plans in frequencies that shouldn't exist, waiting for the next target. And sometimes, late at night, his phone rings with numbers that aren't real numbers. He doesn't answer, because he knows that voice, calm, professional, patient, is still tracking him, still watching, still waiting for the right opportunity to finish what was scheduled years ago. The buyers are patient. The voices between stations never stop broadcasting. And somewhere out there, Raymond's name is still on a list. His accident still scheduled, just postponed to a future date. He'll spend the rest of his life running from a broadcast nobody else can hear, from an organization that exists in the static between FM frequencies, from people who harvest organs from drivers nobody will miss. Raymond Porter quit trucking forever. But he's not sure trucking is quite finished with him yet. Story 7. The static between stations. Raymond Porter had been driving long haul for 16 years, specializing in night runs along the I-10 corridor from Los Angeles to Phoenix. He preferred driving at night, less traffic, cooler temperatures, and the solitude gave him time to think. Raymond was a quiet man, divorced, no kids, whose life revolved around his Peterbilt truck and the endless ribbon of highway. He didn't listen to CB radio much. Instead, he preferred FM radio, constantly scanning for music stations as he traveled through the desert. The radio was his companion, filling the silence with music, news, occasional late-night talk shows. He'd learned which stations had the best range, which would fade out where, and how to time his scanning to always have something to listen to. On November 4th, 2017, Raymond discovered there were things broadcast between the stations that weren't meant to be heard. He left Los Angeles around 10 p.m., hauling a load of furniture to Phoenix. The drive was routine, familiar, almost meditative in its predictability. As he passed through Riverside County, he scanned through his radio presets, looking for something to listen to. Rock station, country station, Spanish language station, all familiar frequencies. Around midnight, somewhere between Indio and Blythe, Raymond was scanning for a new station when his radio briefly caught something between 94.3 and 94.7 FM. Not static, not silence, but a voice. A woman's voice speaking calmly. November 4th, 2017, Interstate 10, eastbound, mile marker 103, Raymond Porter in a dark blue Peterbilt, carrying furniture, blood type O positive, divorced, no children, nobody to miss him. Raymond's hand froze on the tuning knob. The voice continued for maybe 5 seconds before the radio slid past the frequency and caught a normal country station. But in those 5 seconds, the voice had described him, his exact situation, his blood type. How could anyone know his blood type over the radio? He twisted the tuning knob back, trying to find that frequency again. Scanned slowly between 94.3 and 94.7. Nothing but static, just normal radio static, the empty space between stations where nothing should broadcast. Raymond told himself he'd misheard. Maybe it was a traffic report, and his brain, tired and half-focused, had filled in familiar details. Maybe it was a weird ad for an insurance company. Maybe he'd imagined it entirely. He kept driving, settling on a rock station, trying to forget about the voice. 20 minutes later, he scanned past another gap in frequencies, this time between 97.1 and 97.5. The voice returned. Clearer now. Excellent vital organs, healthy despite smoking habit. Accident at mile marker 127 in 43 minutes. Extraction at mile marker 129. Buyer waiting in black Mercedes. Payment already transferred. Raymond yanked his hand away from the radio like it had burned him. His heart was hammering. What the fuck was that? What did it mean by extraction and buyer? What organs? What accident? He pulled over onto the shoulder, hands shaking. The radio continued playing its rock station normally. Everything seemed fine. Everything seemed normal. Except Raymond had just heard something impossible. Something describing him, predicting an accident, talking about organs and buyers. He pulled out his phone to call 911 to report what? A weird radio transmission? They'd think he was crazy. He called his dispatcher instead. But there was no answer at this hour. He tried his ex-wife, no answer. He was alone on a dark highway with a radio that somehow knew things it shouldn't. Raymond made a decision. He'd find a rest area, pull over for a few hours, let whatever was supposed to happen at mile marker 127 not happen. If there was an accident there, he wouldn't be part of it. He started driving again, watching for the next rest area sign. According to his GPS, there was one about 12 miles ahead. He'd make it there, park, and wait out this nightmare. But as he drove, his radio started acting strangely. The rock station began to fade, even though he was well within range. Other stations started breaking through, overlapping, creating a cacophony of sounds. And beneath all of it, Raymond could hear that voice, speaking constantly, describing things. Truck approaching mile marker 115. Speed 62 miles per hour. Will reach 127 at 12:47 a.m. Extraction team ready. Medical equipment prepared. Organs viable for 3 recipients. Heart for Phoenix. Kidneys for Las Vegas. Liver for San Diego. Raymond punched the radio off button. Silence filled the cab. But seconds later, the radio turned itself back on. Cannot escape it, Raymond Porter. The buyers have paid. The accident is scheduled. Extraction team is professional. You'll be harvested efficiently. No, Raymond screamed at the radio. No, 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 this isn't real. He tried changing channels, but every station was the same voice now. Overlapping, speaking over news and music and static, all of them describing his impending death, the planned accident, the organ harvesting that was apparently scheduled from mile marker 127. Raymond floored the accelerator, pushing his rig to 75 miles per hour. If he was going to die at mile marker 127, he'd drive past it so fast that whatever was planned couldn't happen. He'd outrun the prophecy, outrun the accident, outrun whatever nightmare was speaking through his radio. Mile marker 120 passed. Mile marker 123. His truck was shaking, the furniture in his trailer shifting dangerously at this speed, but Raymond didn't care. Mile marker 125. Almost there. Almost past the danger zone. At mile marker 127, Raymond's left front tire exploded. He'd been expecting it, dreading it, and yet when it happened, the violence of it still shocked him. The truck lurched hard left toward the median. Raymond fought the wheel, trying to correct, but the blown tire made control nearly impossible. His training kicked in. Don't hit the brakes hard. Don't overcorrect. Let the truck slow gradually. But this wasn't a normal blowout. The tire had been sabotaged somehow, or the prediction on the radio had been so specific, because the accident was engineered. Either way, Raymond's truck was sliding, jackknifing, the trailer swinging wide as he fought for control. He brought the truck to a stop on the shoulder, heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. He was alive, shaken, terrified, but alive. The accident hadn't killed him. The radio, which had gone silent during the crisis, spoke again. Target immobilized at mile marker 127. Extraction team dispatched. ETA 4 minutes. Raymond looked in his mirrors. About half a mile back, headlights were approaching. Not the normal flow of traffic. These lights were moving fast, closing the distance rapidly. A black Mercedes. Raymond didn't wait. He climbed down from his cab, left the truck running, and ran. He sprinted across the highway, over the median, and into the empty desert. Behind him, he could hear vehicles stopping, doors opening, voices calling. Mr. Rao, Porter, wait. We just want to help. Raymond kept running. The desert was dark, treacherous, full of rocks and cacti and holes. He fell twice, scraped his hands and knees, but kept going. Behind him, flashlight beams swept the darkness searching. He ran for maybe 15 minutes before his lungs gave out. He collapsed behind a large boulder, gasping for breath, listening. The voices were distant now. The flashlight beams weren't visible anymore. Maybe they'd given up. Maybe. His phone rang. Raymond stared at it in horror. The number wasn't saved, just a string of digits. Against every instinct, he answered. Hello, Raymond. The voice from the radio. The voice from the radio. Female, calm, professional. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. The buyers are very disappointed. We have contracts. You were scheduled for processing. Who are you? Raymond gasped. How did you? We broadcast on frequencies between the stations. That's where we live, Raymond, in the spaces between. We identify suitable subjects, lone drivers, no families, healthy organs, and we schedule their acquisitions. It's very efficient. You weren't supposed to hear the broadcast. That was a technical error. But now that you have, you understand that we can't just let you go. You know too much. I'll go to the police. I'll tell everyone. And tell them what? That voices on your radio predicted an accident, that you ran from people offering help? Raymond, you sound insane. Nobody will believe you. But we believe you. 5. And we'll be waiting. She hung up. Raymond sat in the darkness for 3 hours, until dawn broke over the desert. When full daylight arrived, He carefully made his way back to the highway. His truck was gone, not towed, gone, like it had never been there. The black Mercedes was gone. There was no evidence of the blown tire, no debris, no skid marks. The shoulder where he'd stopped was pristine, undisturbed. Raymond walked to the nearest town, 15 miles through the desert. He reported his truck stolen. The police found no record of it. His company said he'd called in the previous night claiming to be sick, had parked the truck at a facility in Blythe, and had turned in his keys. They had documentation, his signature, his voice on the phone call, security camera footage showing him parking the truck. Except Raymond had never been to that facility. He'd never made that call. Someone or something had created an entire false history of that night to make his story impossible. Raymond quit trucking immediately. He couldn't drive anymore, couldn't trust the roads, couldn't listen to the radio without paranoia. But more than that, he knew they were still out there. The voices between stations, the buyers who wanted healthy organs from lone drivers who nobody would miss. He moved to a city, got a job in retail, and stopped driving entirely. He doesn't own a car, takes public transportation, and never travels at night. And he absolutely never ever listens to FM radio. Because he knows that between the stations, in those empty frequencies where nothing should broadcast, there are voices. Voices that watch the highways, voices that identify targets, voices that schedule acquisitions. Raymond Porter was supposed to die on November 4th, 2017, at mile marker 127 on Interstate 10. His organs were supposed to be harvested and distributed to buyers across the Southwest. But he heard the broadcast between stations, and he ran, and he survived. He doesn't know how many other drivers weren't so lucky. How many lone truckers, people with no families, nobody to miss them, vanished on dark highways while voices between radio stations scheduled their deaths. But Raymond knows they're out there, broadcasting their plans in frequencies that shouldn't exist, waiting for the next target. And sometimes late at night, his phone rings with numbers that aren't real numbers. He doesn't answer because he knows that voice, calm, professional, patient, is still tracking him, still watching, still waiting for the right opportunity to finish what was scheduled years ago. The buyers are patient. The voices between stations never stop broadcasting. And somewhere out there, Raymond's name is still on a list, his accident still scheduled, just postponed to a future date. He'll spend the rest of his life running from a broadcast nobody else can hear, from an organization that exists in the static between FM frequencies, from people who harvest organs from drivers nobody will miss. Raymond Porter quit trucking forever. But he's not sure trucking is quite finished with him yet. Story 8, the Mirror World Rest Stop. Angela Cruz had been driving for 22 years, running specialized medical supply routes between San Francisco and Los Angeles. Her white Volvo truck was a familiar sight at hospitals and medical facilities up and down California, and Angela prided herself on never missing a delivery, never having an accident, and maintaining perfect DOT compliance. She was professional, reliable, and experienced. On August 19, 2016, Angela stopped at a rest area that wasn't supposed to exist. She'd left San Francisco at 6 p.m. with a load of medical equipment and supplies headed for Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. The drive down I-5 was something she'd done thousands of times. Every rest stop, every gas station, every landmark was familiar. She knew this route better than she knew her own neighborhood. Around midnight, about 2 hours south of Kettleman City, Angela felt fatigue creeping in. She'd been fighting it for 30 miles, but professional drivers knew when to stop. Pushing through exhaustion was how accidents happened. She needed to pull over, take a quick nap, maybe 15 or 20 minutes to reset. According to her mental map, the next rest area was about 40 miles ahead. But Angela saw a sign, rest area next exit, 1 mile. She frowned. There wasn't a rest area at this location. She'd driven this section hundreds of times. This particular stretch was notable for having a long gap between rest facilities, but the sign was official, proper Caltrans design, clearly marking a rest area. Maybe they'd built a new one? That happens sometimes. New facilities opened without much fanfare. Angela took the exit, following the ramp down to the rest area entrance. The facility looked perfect. Clean, modern, well lit. The parking lot had spaces for maybe 20 trucks and 40 cars. Everything was pristine. Fresh paint, new asphalt, sparkling clean bathrooms visible through glass walls. It was nicer than most California rest areas, which tended to be aging and somewhat run down. But it was completely empty. Not a single vehicle in the parking lot. Not a single person visible anywhere. Angela pulled into a truck parking space, killed her engine, and climbed down. The silence was immediate and wrong. Rest areas always had some ambient noise, freeway traffic, other engines, wind, something. But this place was silent. Absolutely, perfectly silent. She walked toward the restroom building, her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud. The glass walls showed a spotless interior, clean floors, shining fixtures, fully stocked paper products. Everything looked brand new, unused. Angela pushed open the door. The women's restroom was immaculate. She used the facilities, washed her hands, and examined herself in the mirror. She looked tired, stressed, older than her 46 years. The harsh fluorescent lights didn't help. Then she noticed something odd about her reflection. It was slightly delayed, not enough to be obvious, but when she moved her hand, her reflection moved a split second behind. When she tilted her head, the mirror image lagged. Angela stepped closer to the mirror, frowning. The delay was becoming more pronounced. She waved her hand quickly. Her reflection waved back a full second later. She made a face. Her reflection made the same face, but the timing was completely off. Then her reflection stopped following her movements entirely. Angela stood still, but her reflection continued moving, tilting its head, examining her, its expression changing to something that wasn't quite her expression. Something wrong. Angela backed away from the mirror. Her reflection smiled, but Angela wasn't smiling. The reflection raised its hand in a slow wave. Angela's hands were at her sides. She ran from the bathroom, heart pounding. Outside, the parking lot wasn't empty anymore. Her truck was still there, but now there were other trucks, dozens of them, all identical to hers. All white Volvo trucks, all with the same company logo, all parked in perfect rows. Angela approached the nearest truck, the one parked next to hers. She peered through the driver's side window. The interior was identical to her truck. Same decorations hanging from the mirror, same coffee mug in the cup holder, same GPS unit mounted on the dash. Everything exactly the same. She tried the door. Unlocked. She climbed in and checked the registration. Angela Cruz. Her name, her truck number, her insurance information. This was her truck, but her truck was parked right next to this one. There were two of her truck. Or more accurately, there were dozens of her truck, all identical, all parked in this impossible rest area. Angela climbed back down and walked through the parking lot, checking each truck. They were all hers, every single one. Dozens of copies of her Volvo, each one identical down to the scratch on the bumper, the dent on the passenger door, the faded company decal on the trailer. Then she saw movement, someone climbing down from one of the trucks at the far end of the lot. Angela felt relief. Finally, another person. She started walking toward them, calling out, "Hey, hello, can you help me?" The figure turned around. It was Angela, exact in every detail. Her height, her build, her face, her clothes, an identical copy. The other Angela smiled and walked toward her. As they got closer, Angela could see that the other version looked tired, stressed, exactly how she'd looked in that delayed mirror reflection. "Hello, Angela," the other version said in her voice. Welcome to the mirror side. What is this place? It's a rest area between realities, a place where reflections come through. You stopped here because you were tired, but really, you stopped here because I needed you to. I've been waiting here for years, trapped on this side, and now you're going to take my place. Angela backed away. No, this isn't real. I'm hallucinating. I'm exhausted, and I'm seeing things. You're not hallucinating. You crossed over when you looked in that mirror for too long. The reflection world pulled you through, and now I'm going back to the real world in your place. I'm going to finish your delivery. I'm going to go home to your apartment. I'm going to live your life because I've been stuck here long enough. It's your turn now. The other Angela started walking toward Angela's truck, the original one, the real one. Angela ran after her, grabbing her arm. Wait, you can't. That's my truck, my life, The other Angela turned, and her face was no longer quite right. The features were Angela's, but the expression was something else. Something wrong, something that had been trapped in mirrors too long. I can, and I will. You'll get used to it here. Eventually. The others did. Others. The other Angela gestured at the parking lot full of trucks. Every truck here belonged to someone who stopped at this rest area. Every one of them is waiting for their chance to escape, to swap places with someone new. But there's a hierarchy. I've been here the longest, so I get to leave first. You'll have to wait your turn. From the other trucks, figures began emerging. All of them Angela. Dozens of Angela crews, all at different ages, all wearing different clothes from different years, all climbing down from identical trucks. They surrounded her, their faces showing the same exhausted desperation. No, Angela whispered. Please. No. The newest Angela, the one who'd been waiting to escape, climbed into the real truck and started the engine. Angela tried to run to her, to stop her, but the other Angelas held her back. They were strong, these mirror versions, stronger than they should be. The real truck drove away, heading back toward the exit ramp, toward I-5, toward the real world. Angela screamed, fought, but the other versions of herself held her firmly. Shh, one of them said, an older Angela, maybe 60 years old, gray-haired and resigned. Fighting makes it worse. You'll wait here like we do. Eventually, another driver will stop. Eventually, you'll get your chance to escape. It might take years, but it happens. It happened for her. It'll happen for you. They released Angela. She collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Around her, the other Angelas returned to their trucks, climbing back into their cabs, settling in to wait, waiting for the next unfortunate driver to stop at this impossible rest area. Angela looked up at the facility, the pristine building, the perfect parking lot. Everything was too clean, too perfect. This wasn't a real place. This was a pocket dimension, a mirror world, a trap disguised as a rest stop. She walked back to one of the trucks. It didn't matter which one, they were all hers. She climbed into the cab and sat in the familiar seat. Everything was exactly as she'd left it in her real truck. But this wasn't her real truck. This was a copy, a reflection, a prison. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time didn't work right here. The sky never changed, perpetually twilight, neither day nor night. No cars drove past on the adjacent freeway, though Angela could see the highway clearly. No sounds penetrated this place, except the occasional movement of the other Angelas in their trucks. Angela tried to leave on foot. She walked for hours in what she thought was the direction of the highway, but the rest area always remained in sight behind her, never getting farther away. When she turned around, she was somehow standing right back where she started, as if she'd never moved at all. She was trapped, truly, completely trapped. Angela wondered about the version of herself who'd escaped, who was now driving her truck, delivering her cargo, living her life. Would anyone notice the difference? Would her family realize something was wrong? Or would the mirror Angela be able to mimic her perfectly, living Angela's life while Angela herself rotted in this pocket dimension. Days became weeks, or what felt like weeks. Angela lost track of time. She talked to the other Angelas sometimes. They'd all stopped here at different times. Some in the 1990s, some in the early 2000s. One claimed she'd been here since 1987. They all told the same story. Stopped for a rest, saw the delayed reflection, confronted their mirror self, got trapped. How often do new drivers stop here? Angela asked the oldest version. Not often, maybe one every few years. It has to be the right person, the right timing, the right conditions. Someone traveling alone, someone exhausted, someone who sees that delayed reflection and doesn't immediately leave. Most people get scared and run, but some, like us, stay long enough for the swap to happen. 3 years passed in the mirror rest stop, or what Angela thought was 3 years. Time was meaningless here, but she tried to keep track, marking days in a notebook she found in one of the trucks. Then one night, or what passed for night in this eternally twilight place, a new truck pulled into the rest area. Not a Volvo, a Freightliner dark green, different from all the others. A male driver climbed down, looking exhausted, heading toward the restrooms. All the Angelas emerged from their trucks, moving in unison toward the building. Angela ran with them. This was her chance. After 3 years, finally, someone new had stopped here. One of them could escape. And according to the hierarchy the oldest Angela had established, it was Angela's turn. She'd been here long enough. She'd waited long enough. The driver entered the men's restroom. The Angelas waited outside, watching through the glass walls. Angela saw him approach the mirror, saw the same delay in his reflection, saw his confusion turning to horror as his reflection stopped matching his movements. The mirror version of the man stepped out of the mirror, literally stepped through the glass as if it were liquid. The real man screamed and ran, bursting out of the bathroom, sprinting toward his truck. But Angela was faster. 3 years of trapped, desperate energy propelled her forward. She reached his truck before him, climbed into the cab, and started the engine. Behind her, she could see the man screaming, the other Angelas swarming him, the mirror version of him pointing at the truck Angela had stolen. Angela didn't care. She floored the accelerator, leaving the rest area, hitting the on-ramp, merging onto I-5, real highway, real traffic, real wind through the window. She was free. But in the mirror, her truck's side mirror, she could see dozens of Angelas still trapped in that rest area, along with one new driver, one more victim of the mirror world. She'd escaped. She'd stolen someone else's truck, someone else's life, and she'd left behind dozens of versions of herself still waiting, still hoping for their own chance to escape. Angela Cruz never went back to her original life. She couldn't. Someone was already living it, the mirror Angela who'd escaped 3 years earlier. Instead, she became the driver whose truck she'd stolen, assumed his identity, forged new documents, and started over. She never stops at rest areas anymore. She drives straight through her routes, never resting, never looking in mirrors longer than necessary. Because Angela knows the truth. There are places between worlds, thin spots where reflections leak through, where rest stops exist that aren't quite real. And if you're tired enough, desperate enough, unlucky enough to stop at one of these places, you might find yourself trapped in a mirror world, waiting years for a chance to steal someone else's life and escape back to reality. Angela got out, but she'll never forget the feeling of being trapped, of watching her mirror self drive away in her truck, and she'll never forget the guilt of doing the exact same thing to someone else, condemning a stranger to years of imprisonment just so she could be free. That's the price of escape from the mirror world rest stop. Someone always has to stay behind. Someone always has to wait. And Angela Cruz, whoever she is now, whatever name she uses, drives forever haunted by the knowledge of what she left behind and what she stole to survive. Story 9: The Road That Eats Memories. Jackson Wade had been driving long haul for 18 years, primarily running loads across the Midwest. He was methodical, organized, kept detailed logs of every trip, every delivery, every mile. Jackson had an excellent memory. He could recall specific dates, conversations from years ago, details that most people would forget. That meticulous nature made him an excellent driver and a reliable employee. On January 12, 2019, Jackson took a route through rural Iowa that began erasing his memories, one by one, mile by mile. He was hauling agricultural equipment from Des Moines to Sioux City, a simple run he'd done dozens of times. The route was straightforward, U.S. Highway 20 westbound, about 3 hours of driving through empty Iowa farmland. Winter had settled in hard, snow covering the fields, but the highway itself was clear. Jackson left Des Moines at 4 p.m., planning to arrive in Sioux City before dark. The highway was empty, no other traffic, just him and the frozen landscape. He listened to the radio, made small talk with other drivers on the CB, and watched the mile markers tick by. Around 5:15 p.m., somewhere west of Fort Dodge, Jackson realized he couldn't remember what he'd had for breakfast that morning. It was a small thing, insignificant really. He'd been trying to calculate his expenses for the day, trying to remember if he'd spent $8 or $10 on breakfast, and he simply couldn't remember eating breakfast at all. He could remember waking up, remember showering, remember checking his truck before departure, but breakfast, complete blank. Jackson shrugged it off. Everyone had momentary forgetfulness. Stress, fatigue, age all contributed to minor memory lapses. Nothing to worry about. 10 miles later, Jackson couldn't remember his wife's name. He was reaching for his phone to call her, his thumb hovering over her contact, and he couldn't remember her name. He could picture her face clearly, her smile, her eyes, the way her hair curled. He remembered they'd been married for 15 years. He remembered their house, their routines, their arguments and reconciliations. But her name, gone. Just a blank space in his memory where her name should be. Jackson pulled over, panic starting to build in his chest. This wasn't normal forgetfulness. This was something wrong. He looked at his phone at the contact labeled home. The number was there, but no name, just home. He checked his wallet. His driver's license had his name, Jackson Wade, but the emergency contact information that should list his wife showed only a phone number, no name. He called the number. A woman answered. "Hey honey, what's up?" "Who is this?" Jackson asked. Silence. Then, "Jackson, are you okay?" "It's me. The name should have been there." On her lips, audible in the phone, but all Jackson heard was a blank, a gap in sound where the name should have been. He could hear her speaking, hear the syllables, but his brain couldn't process them, couldn't hold on to them. "I can't remember your name," Jackson whispered. "Something's wrong with me. I can't remember your name." More silence. Then her voice worried. "Jackson, I'm calling 911. Stay where you are. Don't drive anymore." But Jackson had already hung up. He looked around at the empty highway, the frozen fields, the gray winter sky. Something about this road was wrong. Something about this stretch of U.S. Highway 20 was doing something to him. He started driving again, slowly, carefully, trying to figure out what was happening. Every few miles, he tested his memory. He tried to remember childhood stories. They were fading, becoming vague. He tried to remember his parents' names. They were gone, just blurry faces and feelings of affection without names or details attached. The road was eating his memories. Jackson tried to turn around, to go back east, to escape whatever effect this highway was having on him. But when he attempted to make a U-turn at a crossroad, he found himself somehow still heading west. The compass on his dashboard showed west. The sun setting in front of him confirmed west, yet he'd turned the truck completely around. The road was forcing him to continue in one direction. More miles passed. Jackson forgot his daughter's name. Then he forgot he had a daughter at all. Then he forgot being married. His life history was disappearing in reverse chronological order. Recent memories vanishing first, older ones. Following, he tried to fight it, tried to hold on to memories by writing them down in his logbook. But when he looked at what he'd written, the words made no sense. Wife, Sarah. He'd written, but he couldn't remember who Sarah was. Daughter, Emma, age 12, loves soccer. He'd written, but the words might as well have been describing strangers. By the time Jackson passed the next mile marker, he'd forgotten his childhood home, his parents, his education. His life before trucking was just a blank. He knew he'd existed before becoming a driver. There must have been a childhood, a family, a history, but all the details were gone. Jackson tried to call for help, but he couldn't remember how to use his phone. He tried his CB radio, but couldn't remember the right words, the right protocols. He just keyed the mic and said, "Help me. Something's wrong. I'm forgetting everything." A voice responded, older, gruff. "Where are you, son?" "I don't know." "A highway. There's snow. I'm driving west, I think." "What highway?" Jackson looked at the road signs, but he couldn't read them. Not that he couldn't see them, the letters were clear, but he couldn't interpret them. The ability to read was disappearing from his mind. He was forgetting language itself. I can't read anymore," Jackson said into the CB. "The road is taking my memories. I'm losing everything. How do I stop it? How do I—" "Get off that road," the voice said urgently. "Get off immediately. Don't keep driving. That's Highway 20 through Story County, isn't it? There's something wrong with that stretch. It's happened before. You need to stop driving. Pull over. Stay still. Don't let the miles take more from you." But Jackson couldn't stop. Every time he tried to brake, his foot wouldn't obey. His truck kept moving forward at exactly 55 miles per hour, seemingly driving itself, carrying him further west, taking more memories with each mile marker. He forgot how to drive. His hands were on the wheel, his feet near the pedals, but the knowledge of what these things did, how they worked, was gone. The truck continued anyway, driving itself or being driven by whatever force controlled this cursed stretch of highway. He forgot language entirely. The CB radio voices became meaningless sounds. The words in his logbook were just symbols without meaning. His own thoughts became harder to form, concepts disappearing as the vocabulary to express them vanished from his mind. Then he started forgetting physical things. How to tie shoes, how to open doors, how to hold objects. He forgot he was human, forgot the names for body parts, forgot that he had a body at all. His consciousness became untethered, floating in the cab of a truck he no longer understood, moving down a road he couldn't comprehend. At 6:47 p.m., somewhere west of Sac City, Jackson Wade forgot who he was entirely. His name, his identity, his sense of self, all gone. He existed as pure consciousness without memory, without context, without understanding. Just awareness inside a moving vehicle, watching lights and shapes pass by the window, feeling motion, but not comprehending it. The truck continued west, mile after mile, the road consuming the last fragments of Jackson's existence. Memory of being alive, memory of existing, memory of consciousness itself, everything erased. At 7:15 p.m., Jackson's truck rolled to a stop on the shoulder of U.S. Highway 20, just east of Sioux City. The engine was still running, the hazard lights were on, but the driver's seat was empty. Police found the truck an hour later. Everything was in order, cargo intact, logbook current, personal belongings present. Jackson Wade's phone showed recent calls to his wife Sarah. His wallet contained his license, his credit cards, family photos. But Jackson himself was gone. The driver's door was locked from the inside. The cab showed no signs of struggle. He had simply vanished. Search teams covered hundreds of square miles. Helicopters with thermal imaging scanned the frozen fields. Dogs tracked scents but found nothing. Jackson Wade had disappeared without a trace. His wife Sarah claimed he'd called her around 5:30 p.m., saying something was wrong with his memory, that he couldn't remember her name. That was the last anyone heard from him. Cell phone records confirmed the call. Traffic cameras showed his truck traveling west on Highway 20, but then the truck appeared on the shoulder, empty, as if its driver had evaporated. The investigation eventually went cold. Jackson Wade was declared missing, presumed dead. His case joined dozens of other mysterious disappearances on U.S. Highway 20 in Iowa. Drivers who vanished without explanation, leaving behind perfectly functional vehicles and no clues. But truck drivers who run that route regularly tell stories. They talk about the stretch of highway west of Fort Dodge, where memories start to slip away. They warn each other to avoid stopping, avoid driving that section alone, avoid looking too closely at the mile markers, because something about them pulls at your mind. Some drivers claim to have seen him, or what's left of him. A figure standing on the shoulder at night, waving at passing trucks. When you get close, the figure is gone. Other drivers report seeing an empty truck driving itself, perfectly centered in its lane, keeping exactly 55 miles per hour, with nobody in the driver's seat. And occasionally, very occasionally, drivers report picking up a hitchhiker on that stretch. A man who climbs into their cab, sits in the passenger seat, and doesn't speak, doesn't respond to questions, just sits there staring forward, as if he doesn't remember language, doesn't remember human interaction, doesn't remember being human at all. When the drivers look away for a moment, checking mirrors, watching the road, the hitchhiker is gone, vanished from a moving vehicle without explanation. Jackson Wade drove that road and didn't drive back. The highway took everything from him, his memories, his language, his identity, his physical form. It consumed him completely, mile by mile, erasing his existence piece by piece, until nothing remained except stories and an empty truck on the shoulder. Veteran drivers avoid that stretch of Highway 20 now. They take longer routes, add hours to their trips, anything to avoid the road that eats memories. Because they know what happened to Jackson Wade. They know that some highways are hungry for more than just traffic. Some roads consume the people who drive them, taking memories as payment for passage, charging a price that increases with every mile until the driver has nothing left to give. And when a driver has given everything, every memory, every thought, every piece of identity, the road takes the driver himself. Jackson Wade paid that price. He drove into oblivion, one memory at a time, until oblivion was all that remained. His truck is still in an impound lot in Sioux City. Nobody will buy it. Nobody will drive it. Because late at night, people swear they can hear the engine running, hear the radio playing, hear a voice on the CB calling for help. A voice that can't remember its own name, can't remember why it's calling, can't remember anything except the terrible certainty that something has been forgotten. Jackson Wade quit trucking forever on January 12, 2019. Except he didn't quit. He was quit. The road retired him, erased him, consumed him. And somewhere on U.S. Highway 20 in Iowa, pieces of his memory still drift, pulled into the asphalt, absorbed by mile markers becoming part of the road itself. A warning to every driver who thinks highways are just pavement and paint. Story 10. The Parallel Highway. Catherine Kate Morrison had been driving for 24 years, specializing in cross-country runs that took her from coast to coast. She'd logged over 3 million miles, driven through every state except Hawaii, and seen every major highway in America. Kate was a road veteran, someone who knew the interstates better than most people knew their own hometowns. On July 23, 2015, Kate discovered that alongside every highway just slightly out of phase with reality runs a parallel highway where different versions of the same drivers travel slightly different lives. She was running a load from Atlanta to Seattle, taking I-90 west through Montana. Around 3 a.m., somewhere between Butte and Missoula, Kate noticed something odd. In her mirrors, she could see another truck following her. Same model Freightliner, same color, same company logo. At first, she thought nothing of it. Coincidences happened. Other drivers worked for the same company, drove the same equipment. But when Kate changed lanes, the truck in her mirror didn't change lanes. When Kate accelerated, the mirror truck maintained its speed. When Kate slowed down, the mirror truck kept going. The movements didn't match, yet the truck remained visible in her mirrors, always the same distance back, always traveling parallel to her position. Kate tried to get a better look. She adjusted her mirrors, tried to catch a glimpse of the driver. But every time she looked, the truck seemed to be in a slightly different position, not behind her, not beside her, but somewhere in between, existing in a space that didn't quite line up with the normal highway. Then she saw the driver's face. It was her own face, not similar, not a look-alike. It was Kate Morrison, exact in every detail, driving an identical truck on a highway that overlapped with but wasn't quite the same as the highway Kate was on. Kate pulled over onto the shoulder, heart pounding. She watched in her mirrors as the parallel truck also pulled over, parking in what seemed to be the exact same spot but somehow in a different space. The other Kate climbed down from her cab. Kate got out of her truck. She could see the other version of herself about 20 feet away, standing beside an identical truck, but the space between them was wrong. It looked like 20 feet, but Kate had the disturbing sense that it was actually infinite, that the other Kate existed on a different layer of reality, visible but impossibly distant. "You can see me," the other Kate called out. "Yes. Who are you? What's happening?" "I'm you, or a version of you. We're on parallel highways. Usually they don't line up, but tonight, conditions are right. The space between realities is thin. You're seeing the version of yourself from the next layer over." Kate felt dizzy. This wasn't possible, but the evidence was standing right in front of her, herself, talking to herself, explaining something impossible with calm certainty. "What do you mean, next layer over?" "Every time you make a choice, reality splits. Every time something could go two different ways, it goes both ways, creating parallel timelines. Most of the time, these timelines don't interact, but highways are special. They're liminal spaces, in between places, and sometimes late at night, under the right conditions. The parallel highways line up and drivers can see their other selves." Kate stared at her parallel self. "So you're what?" "The version of me from a timeline where I made different choices." "Exactly. In your timeline, you took this route. In my timeline, I took the same route. We're the same person, living the same life, mostly. But there are differences. In my timeline, we didn't marry Steve. In my timeline, we stayed with our first job instead of switching companies. Small differences that accumulated over years. This is insane. I know. I felt the same way the first time I saw myself. Or rather, another version of myself. This is my third crossing. My third time when the parallel highways lined up enough for me to see another Kate. Each time, I learn a little more about how this works." Kate walked toward her parallel self, trying to bridge the distance. But no matter how many steps she took, the other Kate remained the same distance away. The space between them refused to close. "You can't cross over," the other Kate said. "The timelines are parallel but separate. We can see each other, talk to each other, but we can't physically touch. The space between us is 20 feet in infinity at the same time. How long does this last? Not long. Maybe an hour, maybe less. Eventually, the highways drift apart again, and you won't be able to see me anymore. But Kate, I need to warn you about something. About what happens if you keep driving long haul for another 10 years. What happens? The other Kate's expression became sad, haunted. You have an accident. Not in your timeline yet. It's still 10 years away. But I've seen it. I've talked to versions of us who are further along in their timelines. There's an accident waiting for you in 2025 on I-5 in California. A jackknife during a rainstorm. Most timelines you survive but with serious injuries. Some timelines you don't survive at all. Kate felt cold. You're saying I'm going to die. In 10 years? In most timelines, yes. But not all. I've talked to versions of us who quit trucking before 2025. They're alive, healthy, living different lives. The accident only happens if you're still driving. If you're still on that road at that time. But I love driving. This is my life. I can't just quit because of something that might happen 10 years from now in a parallel timeline. It's not might happen. It will happen. I've seen it across dozens of timelines. The further along the timeline goes, the more inevitable it becomes. By 2024, almost every version of us is heading toward that accident. Only the ones who quit early escape it. Kate wanted to argue, to deny it, but staring at her own face, her own self from a parallel reality, made it impossible to dismiss. If parallel timelines existed, if she could see herself from another version of her life, then why couldn't future timelines also exist? Why couldn't the pattern of her life lead inevitably toward an accident in 2025? What do you want me to do? Kate asked quietly. Think about quitting, soon, in the next year or two. Find something else. You're only 42. You have time to start over, to build a different life. But if you wait too long, if you keep driving until 2024, the accident becomes unavoidable. The timelines converge, and all versions of us end up on I-5 in a rainstorm, jackknifing into the median. Kate felt tears on her face. I don't want to quit. This is all I know. This is who I am. I know. I feel the same way. Every version of us feels that way. But the ones who survive, the ones who make it past 2025, they're the ones who found the courage to walk away from the highway before it was too late. The parallel Kate started to fade. Not disappearing exactly, but becoming less solid, more transparent. The space between them was growing, the highways drifting apart. Wait, Kate called. What timeline are you from? Did you quit? Are you okay? I quit last year. The parallel, Kate said, her voice becoming distant. I'm alive in 2015 because I stopped driving in 2014. I work in logistics now, office job, home, every night. I miss the road every single day, but I'm alive. And Kate, I want you to be alive too. Please, quit before it's too late. The parallel Kate faded completely. The highway beside Kate's highway, the parallel road where other versions of herself traveled, became invisible again. Kate stood alone on the shoulder of I-90 in Montana, watching normal traffic pass by on a normal highway. She got back in her truck and sat there for an hour, thinking, could she quit? Could she walk away from trucking based on a warning from a parallel timeline version of herself? It sounded insane, but she'd seen it. She'd talked to herself from another reality, and the warning had been clear. Keep driving, and you'll die in an accident in 2025. Kate finished her delivery to Seattle. She thought about the parallel Kate's warning for weeks, months. She didn't quit immediately. She kept driving, kept working, kept doing what she loved, but the warning haunted her. Every time she drove in rain, every time she felt her trailer shift on wet pavement, she thought about that future accident. In 2016, Kate took a desk job at her trucking company. Operations manager, coordinating loads, working with drivers. She told people she wanted to be home more, that she was getting too old for long haul. But the real reason was the warning from her parallel self, the knowledge that if she stayed on the road, 2025 would bring an accident that ended her life. The years passed. Kate adjusted to office life, though she missed driving terribly. She missed the highway, the solitude, the endless miles. But she stayed off the road. She stayed alive. In July 2025, Kate saw the news report, a massive pileup on I-5 in California. Multiple trucks involved, rainstorm conditions, several fatalities. Among the dead, a truck driver named Catherine Morrison, 42 years old, 24 years of experience, killed when her freightliner jackknifed into the median. Kate stared at the news, her hands shaking. That was her. Or it would have been her. In the timeline where she didn't quit, in the timeline where she didn't heed the warning from her parallel self, she died exactly as predicted. The accident had happened. The convergence of timelines had occurred, and somewhere, in a parallel reality, a version of Kate Morrison had died on that highway. But not this Kate. This version had survived because she'd been warned, because one night on I-90 in Montana, she'd seen herself from a parallel timeline and received a warning that saved her life. Kate never drove commercially again. She couldn't. Every time she thought about getting back behind the wheel, she remembered that news report, remembered seeing her own name among the fatalities, remembered that in most timelines she'd died that day. She was living on borrowed time, existing in a timeline where she'd made the right choice, where she'd listened to her parallel self and walked away from the highway before it was too late. Sometimes at night, Kate drives out to I-90, parks on the shoulder and watches the trucks go by. She wonders if any of those drivers are seeing their parallel selves, getting warnings from other timelines, learning about accidents that haven't happened yet. She wonders how many of them will listen, how many will quit before their inevitable accidents, how many will survive because they caught a glimpse of the parallel highway and saw their own future. Kate Morrison quit trucking forever in 2016, 9 years before she would have died. She lived because she saw herself from a parallel timeline and believed the warning. And somewhere out there, on highways that run parallel to ours, other versions of Kate Morrison are still driving, still living slightly different lives, still heading toward or away from that accident in 2025. The parallel highways exist. They run alongside ours, invisible most of the time, carrying different versions of the same drivers toward different fates. And on rare nights, when conditions are right, when the space between realities grows thin, drivers can see themselves, past selves, future selves, parallel selves, and learn truths about their lives that shouldn't be knowable. Kate learned hers. She saw her own death coming a decade in advance, and she had the wisdom, or the fear, or the courage to walk away from the highway before it killed her.